We all know user stories are typically too brief and do not tell much about the behavior of the system when a user tried to use the user story. Even when we add some acceptance criteria, those normally focus on the happy path behavior. I want to show you how you can use the AI assistant built into iALM.ai to break down a user story to a set of scenarios that covers normal, abnormal, extreme, and unexpected behavior. Those scenarios will also cover interaction between the user, the system, and other systems. Let's get started. Let's assume we have a user story like this. As a customer, I want to be able to check the status of my order online. As you can see, this user story does not have any details. It does not have description. I'm just doing this for the purpose of the demo so that we can see how our AI assistant is going to react. Now, let's assume that I want to ask my AI assistant break down this user story to a number of scenarios so that we can use them to build code and test cases for the user story. Here, generate scenarios. Right away, the AI assistant comes and say, I cannot give you any scenarios because I need some more details. Okay, makes sense. Let's give it some details. Okay, here. We'll add some brief description. All right? Let me save quick. Okay, now let me go back to AI Assistant and say, now generate scenarios. The AI Assistant comes back and say, well, I could possibly generate some scenarios, but they would not be complete. If you allow me to ask some clarifying questions, I can give you more complete set of scenarios. Okay, that sounds good to me. So, I'm going to go back and say, go ahead, generate some clarifying questions. Let's now find out how many clarifying questions and what kind of questions the AI assistant will ask. These should be the kind of questions that you, as a Q&A person or developer, should be asking the product owner or the stakeholders to help you understand the scope of the user story. Now, just based on my simple description, it gave me a total of 17 clarifying questions. Now, a product owner or a business analyst or whoever wrote the user story needs to answer some of these questions. Or, as a matter of fact, they need to answer all questions. Now, let me pretend I am one of those and try to answer some of those questions. Okay, what specific delivery information should the customer receive? Let's say something like delivery date. Okay, I'm trying to be brief here. Will the customer need to provide any additional information? I'll say no. So now let me save my answers. Now, once I do that, I have the option either to go ahead and generate scenarios based on the answers I've given, or I could ask the AI assistant to give me some follow-up questions based on these two answers I gave. Remember, I also still have 15 other questions that I did not answer. All right? So here you go. Give me some follow-up questions. Again, this is simulating what should happen between a developer or a QA person and product owner. When the product owner answers a question, you might have some follow-up questions. Now, based on my answer to the first question, it gave me a total of 10 more questions. Also, based on my very simple answer to the second question, it gave me a total of 16 questions, just because my answer was no. All right, now I have the option either to go ahead and generate some scenarios, or actually, I am supposed to answer some of those follow-up questions. Also, I need to go back and answer some of those 15 original clarifying questions that I did not answer. Again, remember, the more questions that get answered, the more complete set of scenarios we are going to get. And of course, the more questions that get answered, the more follow-up questions the AI assistant will ask. If you want, you can really continue this process until all questions are answered. You can also decide to end the Q&A session at any time and ask the AI assistant to give you scenarios based on questions answered so far. You can always come back and answer more questions and ask for more scenarios. The more questions you are willing to answer, the more scenarios you can get. For now, let me take this option, Generate Scenarios, just to see what scenarios I will get. Of course, it's not going to give me too many because I have not provided a lot of information. I only answered 2 of 17 questions. Also, my answers were very brief. Now it says, based on the information you gave me, I am able to generate 5 scenarios. Okay, now I can see the scenarios that have been generated. Or I can go and answer more questions, as I said. If I answer more questions, I'll get more scenarios. Let's just look at the scenarios here. Here are the 5 scenarios. For every scenario, it tells me whether it is negative or positive. Remember, positive scenarios are those scenarios that represent a normal course of action, kind of happy path, the kinds of things you mostly see in acceptance criteria. Negative scenarios, on the other hand, are scenarios that have to do with unexpected, uncommon, extreme, or what we call shall not do situations. Like if a user tries to do something that he or she is not supposed to do. Also remember, those negative scenarios are likely to fail in production, simply because most developers and testers do not think about them. It also gives me these three parameters that determine the risk level of the scenario. Frequency of occurrence, which means how often do we think this scenario is going to happen in production. Impact of failure means if the scenario were to fail in production, what would be the impact on the business or operation in general? And the probability of failure. Basically, what is the likelihood for this scenario to fail in production? Based on these three parameters, it gives me a testing priority, which is simply calculated as the average of the three parameters, assuming high is 3, medium is 2, and low is 1. So, it adds them up and divide by 3. That's why the testing priority is always between 3 and 9. This testing priority is critical when the team does not have time to test all scenarios, or at least, test all scenarios with the same level of rigor. That's where we will use formal versus informal testing, as we will see in a different recording. It also tells me these scenarios were created by the AI assistant as opposed to other team members. If I want to look at any scenario here, it gives me the description of the scenario. The expected behavior, which means how would you expect the system to react to the scenario if it were to happen in production. Here you can see the user story that this scenario was created for. It also gives you the steps that someone needs to follow to test the scenario. Down here, it would normally list formal and informal test cases, which will be covered in a different recording where we're going to see how we can take a scenario like this and create formal and informal test cases.